Good evening, everyone. And again, welcome to the Breck Forum. We have a very important book to talk about tonight by a young brother, Stephan Bradley, that deals with a very important central movement in New York City that had national repercussions during the 1960s and early 70s, not just on campuses, but in various Black and Latino communities across this nation. We will hear from Stephan and talk about his book, and most likely talk about the research and the development of the book, and then have commentary from my good comrade, my brother, Bill Sales, who was one of the key leaders at Columbia in 1968 in Hamilton Hall, and all the things that are affiliated with that struggle that went on in the spring of '98. I mean, the spring of '68. There was another thing happening in '98, and then I might comment on it because I was there also in Hamilton Hall, not as a student of Columbia, but as a community activist, quote unquote. Also known as an outside agitator. So without any further verbiage from me, I'll hand it over to Brother Bradley, and he could talk about the book.
All right, well, I really wanted to thank Brother Anderson, Brother Kazembe for putting this together. I know you all could have got some really important people. I know that Sarah Palin's Going Rogue just came out, and so you could have got some important people, but instead you got me, so now you did it. When I read books, I always think, who is this person to write this book? Who do they think they are to write this book? And so I thought it'd only be fair if I told you about who I am and the reason why I wrote this book and that sort of thing. And so some years back, maybe a decade or so back, an archivist asked me what attracted me to this topic that's very much local history. And so at the time, I wish I could have been so eloquent, but since then I've really thought about it. And I thought that, and this is what I learned growing up, is that history is the record of people and events that take place in time and space. The times were crazy. Vietnam, Black power, civil rights, student power, youth culture, all of this at once taking place on one little campus in Morningside Heights in New York City. And I thought that was enough when you included the cast of characters who participated in this event. And see if you can follow me. Look, from Alexander Hamilton to Frederick Law Olmsted, to H. Rap Brown, to Stokely Carmichael. Mark Rudd is in the room. Brother Bill Sales is in the room. Brother Anderson himself. All of these people participating in the same spot. Stokely Carmichael, H. Rap Brown. All these people at the same spot. So I couldn't set this story down. I couldn't set it down if I wanted to. And so to give you a better sense of myself, I'd like to just, if I could, read you a little bit from the prologue, and I think that will give you a little better idea about me. And so it says, I grew up the son of Southerners in the evergreen state of Washington. It's Yakima, Washington. We proudly breathe easy and enjoy our space. In Washington, trees are abundant, and it is truly green everywhere. I suppose we Northwesterners sometimes take for granted the fact that not everyone can enjoy these natural luxuries. With that mindset, in '97, I visited New York for the first time. I was amazed at how fast-paced the borough of Manhattan was, and I marveled at the skyscrapers and bright lights on the buildings. I was a real country bumpkin. I was somewhat unsettled, however, that so many people were bumping into me and that I was bumping into so many people. I stayed with the son of one of my former professors in the basement of an apartment building near 110th Street and Broadway. Now, living in the apartment was my host, his wife, and a new baby, and I found this to be very strange. It wasn't strange that a young family would be living in an apartment, but that this family was living in a one-bedroom apartment where the pipes were exposed, there were no windows, and there was very little space at all. And for such cramped living quarters, I found out that my host family paid well over $1,000 a month. That was mind-boggling. I couldn't fathom paying so much for so little, but I suppose it was necessary to survive. Now, as I began my research at Columbia, I walked to the university, and on the way I saw all types of people, which was exciting. I also did research at the Schomburg Center on 135th and Lenox, Malcolm X Boulevard in Harlem. I had to walk there as well. And while doing all this walking, I noticed several things. First, I noticed that my feet hurt. Right? New Yorkers walk a lot. Second, I observed that in that part of the city, everything seemed very gray, and it was at times hard to see the sun. The most poignant image I took in was that of children playing football on the sidewalk, and they were playing rather roughly, and I thought that maybe concrete wasn't the best venue for such a game. Well, I guess that's what makes New Yorkers tough, though, I guess. And so then it all occurred to me at once, and I stopped walking. The 1968 controversy at Columbia was connected to all of my observations. Space in New York comes at a high price. There are skyscrapers because there's little horizontal space left. Because there were so many different kinds of people in the city, people were destined to bump into each other, literally and figuratively, in search of space of their own. Finally, green space, places where children could play tackle football, was rare and could be found almost exclusively in parks. That was what made Morningside Park so important to both Columbia and the residents of Harlem. In a place where concrete reigns and life moves so quickly, recreational space was as much a commodity as was living space. Also, the impossibility of finding and keeping inexpensive living arrangements was why bad blood ran between Columbia and the Harlem community. The racial and economic disparities between those who lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan in the 1960s added to the recipe of confrontation. And in retrospect, the fact that this stew of city life boiled over in 1968 seemed almost predictable. Now, the reason why I wrote this book was for several reasons. One of them is fairly cheesy. One of my heroes in life was a man by the name of John Hope Franklin, and superstar historian, I thought anyway. And at one point he had said that every generation is obligated to write their own history, to write their own version of history. And so I took it to heart. I thought he meant it sincerely. And also I study, Black Power and youth activism and this sort of thing. And one of the Black Power directives was for Black people to write their history and that sort of thing. And so I thought that I would be doing that. And so that leads me into the next thing, which was I wanted to rearrange the historical memory of the rebellions at Columbia in the 1960s. As they've been remembered in the last 40 years, we've remembered the Students for a Democratic Society's push against Columbia University's ties to the Vietnam War, and we've remembered leaders like Mark Rudd, and we remember the bloody scenes of the mass removal and that sort of thing. But who doesn't have a voice in this story, who doesn't get play in this remembrance, are the people from Harlem who pushed against this gymnasium for years, are the Black students who allied themselves with these community members who pushed against this gymnasium. And it's my argument with this book that without those Harlem community activists, without those Black students, there would have been no Columbia Rebellion that we remember. And so I think it's important to add some voices to this story. And so with that in mind, I'll start. And like the Baptist preacher says, I'll be done soon, Brother Anderson. I'll be done soon. But land ownership, including the ownership of parks, has long been an important aspect of African American political, social, and economic life. In the United States, the ownership of land is like one of the truest forms of freedom. It defined voting rights, it defined citizen rights, it defined economic independence. People say that there are scholars who say that the founding fathers actually fought the war for independence because they wanted to protect their land assets. And so with this in mind, I think land ownership is that much more important for African Americans who could trace at one point being owned to potentially owning something. And so after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, you have this period of Jim Crow where African Americans are segregated into various places. And as you move into World War I, you see African Americans leaving the rural South, going to the urban North, and settling in places like Detroit, like the South Side of Chicago, like Philadelphia, and of course like Harlem.